Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast. Today, it's a great pleasure to bring you Dr. Tuomo Kauranne from Arbonaut. And Tuomo, this is your chance now to set the record straight in how badly I pronounce your name. So for our Finnish viewers and listeners, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, okay. Thanks a lot, Kevin, and really thanks a lot for having me. It's interesting and very impressive to be talking to the Western Pacific Canadian coast. I mean, it's actually not that often that I've been there. But I've seen Canada, of course, in many ways quite similar to Finland, and also in terms of forestry being both advanced and quite important, so that there's a lot to do on digital forestry. Happy to be here. So, yeah, I'm Tuomo Kauranne, a mathematician by training. Actually, I have no education in forestry whatsoever, but like every Finn, we end up somehow starting our working careers by planting pine trees. This is just the way it is here. So did I, and it actually served me very well back in the 1970s and 80s. So I'm not that young anymore. Since I encountered this young lady at the time in 1980, who was from the country, and I was an aspiring mathematician, pure mathematician, more or less a scientist, and thought about a scientific career. But then this one fateful event changed my life. December 11th, 1980, on a short flight from Kuopio in central Finland to Joensuu, where Arbonaut is based, I met Aino, my spouse, for over 40 years now. But then, of course, she wasn't at the time. And I had this difficulty of expressing my fondness of her. Just a 15-minute flight. But what had happened was that she was visiting a neighboring town, second time in her life on a flight, because her brother had a serious forestry accident, actually a forest mensuration accident. So Eero had been measuring trees, as the practice was at the time, at not only at breast height, but also at 6.5 meters height. They had this aluminum rod, which was used to take this diameter at that height. And he was walking in the misty forest in November and walked too close to a power line. So what happened? The arc hit down and he got electrocuted really, really bad. And he had to spend like 6 months of the next 6 months in a hospital, being patched together and saved back to life. He hasn't worked as a forester ever since. He's still very keen on forest. Eero survived the incident, but Aino was there. His left leg had been amputated on that day.
Wow.
And Aino was there staying as long as she could with him in order to return to her job on a night shift as a nurse in a hospital in Joensuu. That's why she was on that flight. And so then, the story was so touching that I immediately felt that, okay, this is going to have a lot of importance for me as well. But I couldn't express after 15 minutes that, okay, you're fond of her. Finns are famously talkative, but what happened was that Aino said that, okay, she would like to stay as much as possible with her brother, but she doesn't really have a place to stay in Kuopio, which was my native town. And I said, okay, Miss, can I have your phone number or address, and I will find you a place to stay. I was living in Helsinki, in the capital myself, but I had half the city were my friends, so I organized her that. And then next time called her, I told I could also join and visit. And then that's how we started. We spent several weeks every now and then next to Eero's bed, and he was slowly recovering and getting back his will to live. And it wasn't easy. I mean, certainly he was often very angry at God for having caused him this. But in the end, he had like 3 children by the time. Now he has 6 children and 15 grandchildren. And he's the guy who manages the family forest. So I know. So that's how I got into forest, quite literally.
Wow.
And also into this forest measurement business. It wasn't the plan in some way, but I realize now Arbonaut has somehow come to change the way forests are measured as have you, Kevin. And so LiDAR may not be safe, but at least you don't get to that kind of accidents as it was.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I can definitely say that LiDAR isn't going to result in having 6 kids and 15 grandchildren either. So I'm not sure about that. But what an amazing story! I didn't know that, Tuomo. In the years that we've chatted, what a fascinating origin of how you got into that space. A touch of love and a touch of maybe tragedy as well. But that's amazing. Now you are the CEO of Arbonaut, but as well, looking at your profile, you're a smart dude, and you're also a fit that smiles a lot. So there's something magical here. You have multiple master's degrees, I believe, multiple PhD degrees. Maybe tell me more about, is this just a hobby collecting some of these degrees, or is it just you're
Well,
always learning? Like, share with me that pedigree with all those degrees from different universities.
gladly, yeah. I mean, I've never planned to be an entrepreneur. I come from a family of public servants. My only acquaintance with entrepreneurship was two uncles who both went bankrupt. So I I wasn't exactly encouraged or even planning in any way to become an entrepreneur and the founder of a company. I was a scientist and very keen on mathematics and computer science and so on. And my early years I spent doing actually supercomputers and climate forecasting, weather forecasting. One of the key moments was about 5 years at the European Weather Center, ECMWF in Reading, that still proudly produces the best weather forecast ever known. There's an intense competition between American and European centers, but I think Europe is one area where Europe has stayed ahead. And so it was about this, what you can do with computers and so on. But then, given this initial state of our life, I wanted to get back to this quite remote location in Eastern Finland, which does have a University of Eastern Finland, as it was University of Joensuu, which has a rather nice faculty of forestry, just like, for example, UBC over there in Vancouver. And so I thought that what can a theoretical dude like me do in a place like this? And I applied for various kinds of jobs. Nobody wants to hire a mathematical PhD. Besides, I didn't have a PhD, by the way. I was prolonging my studies in many different ways. And so I enrolled at university first, but then of course the requirement to complete your PhD eventually comes. Now it's different in Finland. These good old days, we didn't aim for a degree. We rather have a saying that, okay, unfortunately, eventually graduating interrupted studies that had started so well. So I took my time. I took 12 years to complete my first master's degree. But then having this university job, I obviously had to do it at some point. And we have like 3 levels of degrees, or 4, bachelor, master's, then licentiate, and finally doctorate. So I did all of these in computer science, mathematics related fields, applied maths, featuring a lot of industrial applications, and remote sensing gradually becoming part of those, so satellite imagery and so on. But I held a second job at the university almost all my life. So until 4 years ago, in fact, when I finally quit my last university job. And this is more or less where it comes. So I taught maybe 10 PhDs and well over 100 masters in engineering.
Wow,
And
amazing.
so it was always like this is where I earn. But universities are bureaucratic places, and I wanted to have an impact. And this is where it came to finding Arbonaut, or founding Arbonaut. I was actually cheated into becoming a founder. So I wanted to be a scientist. But what happened was that there's this establishment of science parks, or technology parks, and that sort of things. That's also got very popular in Finland. And this was happening roughly at the same time when Nokia started to become kind of a global star for the decade or so that it had held that position before being killed off by Silicon Valley. and and then Joensuu is no exception. So once you have a university, you need to have some kind of foundry for startups. And there was one here, a science park, and they pretty much offered that. They set up the company. I can just concentrate on some applications that initially were machine vision applications in industry. And one of the targets we had was just happened to be analog aerial photography of Malaysian forests. So we actually started in the south. That's one of the nice things about the University of Eastern Finland. It's very international, both research-wise and student-wise. And we had applications of forests all over the world. So it became quite clear that this would be somehow the most reasonable thing to do in an otherwise rather provincial university. And yeah, then I realized also later on, actually I did there was a venture capital VC stage in Arbonaut where we were doing something totally different. That was about mobile phone positioning. So we actually built together with some Finnish partners the first mobile phones with GPS and mapping services in those, and that became Arbonaut's first business, and we got funded. And I was in fact told to sell all forest technology we had developed by that time to somewhere, and they ended up in the US in the hands of Adam Russell, who was living in Doylestown, north of Philadelphia, and he purchased my forest technology and my forest team, 4 people strong at the time. Unfortunately, he wasn't actually in the end able to pay for it. So I became a shareholder in this US company that was doing forestry while struggling my way through these mobile location services and so on, that eventually ended in the dot-com collapse. So that, okay, I had like 60 people and I had to fire them all. And I was left with one guy, one programmer and 2 customers, and with a single project each, both in forestry. So that moment in 2003 became decisive for Arbonaut. And yeah, at the same time also, I got back my forest technology from the US. We had several sojourns in the US later on, and again, maybe right now, but it's been a bit like on and off. So that's how Arbonaut ended up focusing on forestry, mostly because realizing that in this small place, Joensuu has a population of 70,000 or so, forestry is by far the strongest discipline, and also the deepest base of knowledge of where to develop technology. And after having been this mobile telephony business, internet business for a while, I wanted something where things move a bit more slowly.
Yes.
Not
Yes.
forestry is definitely like that, but not that I want it this slowly as they have proven to prove. And this is something I'm sure you share, Kevin, that this
Yeah.
we'd always
Absolutely.
want this growth to be faster and change to be faster. It just isn't the way trees grow or forestry
For
changes.
sure.
But yeah.
For sure. Well, one of the things I love speaking with people like you is you're so humble and modest. So I'm going to do a bit of your chest beating. So you're approaching 30 years in business. So as we think about companies that often don't even make the 2-year mark, there's reason for celebration here. And when I looked at did a bit more research, right, in terms of Arbonaut, you've worked in 30 plus countries,
Yes.
which is just amazing, like over 100 plus projects. And as you describe, I know this VC and this individual tree inventory. I just want to let the listeners and viewers know that this was in the 1998 timeframe. So this is before. That's the right word. I don't want to. There's waves of technology innovation, and Tuomo, you're involved with the very first one that probably a lot of people don't realize. So today, where a lot of people talk about individual tree inventories, you and Arbonaut were the first ones with this technology. They're talking about this intellectual property. So I just wanted to kind of bring that to the forefront, because as we're talking about some of those adventures and maybe missteps, the work you've done is truly fascinating. And I want to kind of poke a little bit in there, because you also have software products. Like there's a lot there. So maybe thinking of your background and with Arbonaut, and maybe we jump into it and say LiDAR and forest inventory as one of the pioneers in the early 2000s. Is the world, what are you doing today? Because I know you're doing a lot of carbon work as well, a lot of remote sensing, very technical forestry work, which is perfectly aligned with the theme of this podcast. What about maybe how much of the forest inventory work are you doing today? Does it dominate your business, or has other players in the space, I don't want to say caught up, but maybe the technology is commoditized isn't the right word either, but LiDAR is prevalent, whereas you and I back in the day was, the newest thing, shooting at very
Mm,
pulse rates.
mm,
How much
mm.
of that is Arbonaut's business now, or is it more on the carbon red plus types of programs?
No, I would still say that our spearhead, the part where we want to show our skill, is still very much based on airborne LiDAR, airborne laser scanning. I mean, we do the whole range of things to some extent, but we haven't found any other source of forest information that is as robust and reliable as LiDAR. We do a lot of data fusion. Now, algorithm-wise, this is where my weather forecasting background helps us a lot. So that it brought two things. First of all, that weather forecasting center was totally global already. When I went there, I said that okay, this is the kind of I want to build a company that resembles this weather forecasting center. Weather doesn't respect borders, so therefore, nor do forests. So we need to understand them from an ecological point of view. But the second was this data fusion, the idea that, okay, a good weather forecast, has a computer model that simulates the atmosphere, and then it has a lot of observations, measurements of various kinds that are very heterogeneous, each have their own error patterns, and you try to merge them all globally. I mean, weather forecasting, because that European Weather Center really produces global weather forecasts like up to 2 weeks ahead, and nowadays even seasonal ones, 3 months and so. So what happens is that you have to have the right statistics and mathematics in order to not create systematic error or bias in this. And bias kills, even in forestry. And so going back to this individual tree recognition, actually this dawned on us very strongly on our first American venture with Adam Russell. I want to acknowledge Adam's role in sort of being a kind of a sparring partner and business partner in many ways in the past and maybe in the future as well. But what happened that he took the technology and he had this great idea that he wants to, that was still based on analog aerial imagery, but we did individual 3D canopy segmentation. So this whole idea of segmenting canopies by image segmentation type techniques from aerial photography was how Arbonaut started this idea. And luckily we had these first LiDAR trials by Juha Hyppä and Erik Nessen and others nearby. So we ended up applying the same method to LiDAR, which is much easier, obviously, because you get the canopies are easier to, they are symmetric, whereas in aerial photography, they are inherently asymmetric. So what happened that we did this individual tree segmentation and estimation, calibrated on field plots, which is still basically what we do. But some of the customers, I think the one who really did it was Boise. They cut down one full stand or cut block and measured every single trunk and showed us the result. And we had systematic error. Basically, I then realized that individual tree detection, if that's the only thing you do, has this problem that you see only the top canopy layer and the big trees, and you don't get a signal of whatever is beneath. And thereby, if you calculate the sensors of your trees and the volume, you get the wrong diameter distribution. You systematically violate the rules of nature by the nature of your remote sensing. And this was exactly the thing we had been battling with in weather forecasting. You try to avoid it by all means. You have to have statistically correct ensemble forecast, as they say. So then LiDAR kind of resolved that because it reaches the ground and so on. But we had to change the algorithm completely for a while. And this is where we ended up adopting something quite similar to what Erik Nessen and Matti Maltamo had tried, that this area-based method. So that is statistically correct, but it kind of misses the trees for the forest. It produces result on this grid, and everything is the statistical variable, fair enough, but you'd like to see somehow trees as well. So what we nowadays do is we combine the two. We always calculate the basic statistics with area-based method, but we do also segment individual canopies, and luckily most often we were able to get dense enough LiDAR. So the limit goes somewhere between 5 and 10 points per square meter, where you can reliably detect canopy polygons. Mind you, those canopy polygons are still not yet trees. They are canopy polygons, and the number of stems on each canopy polygon is a random variable with It doesn't always even have to be integer valued. I guess most of us like to think about them integer valued. So there's only a fixed number, a natural number of tree stems underneath. So that's how, the science has in a way been slowly migrating. But what has happened since then, where we are most active nowadays, is how do you interpret this data in terms of richness of applications, especially what other things you can see, not just raw material for lumber and timber industry or pulp industry, the worst. You see a forest. You see what kind of, structure the forest has. We nowadays very often count the dead trees in order to see how do we have decay in trees, trying to quantify biodiversity. I mean, we are really still quite far from reliably doing that, but we have some ways of producing surrogate variables that correlate with richness of biodiversity. Water flow, that's also something where LiDAR excels, that, okay, you actually get a really nice terrain model and you can calculate the water flow even on very flat wetlands, which we have plenty of in Finland, and I presume also in Canada, at least on the on the areas where they are prevalent, so that you can start calculating the water balance and the water table of the area. So in that way, mostly what we now do is producing a richer ecosystem perspective of the forest, but it's still forest inventory. Now, in order to have that, and the Arbonaut's fundamental goal has for a long time been to make this kind of good forest science have a positive impact on the world. And for me, that is more geared towards ecology than economics, although both have to be taken into account. And even the social, the human side, especially when you're down in the global south, be it Africa or Asia. So in every country, we have kind of a different pattern of what kind of forest information is needed and for what decisions this is used. But these forest information systems or forest management systems that we produce, they are meant to help the practitioners of this forestry, the planners, to make better decisions based on the data that forest inventory produces. And quite early on, we sort of wanted to build up both sides simultaneously to be able to do it, but it was also a matter of survival. That, I mean, we don't own any aircraft or scanners, so often we're up against remote sensing endeavors that have this capacity. On the other hand, we are not an IT integrator. We don't hire people for like agile technologies. Normally, agile methodology means that we try to bundle them into with some kind of a service contract, but in practice, our most common business form is still a project. So
right.
Yeah.
So thinking of that rich experience with LiDAR and imagery and individual tree segmentation, where the world is today, there's always, we've seen the waves over the, every decade, there seems to be a wave of things, people maybe talk about the same thing every decade or so. But in your experience, where are we today now at the individual tree inventory level? Like you mentioned, you're basically doing a hybrid approach with a area-based and an individual tree approach based. But there's folks out there that are also selling, individual tree technologies. Do you think we're still chasing the holy grail, if that's the right word, or it's still a complex problem to solve that we're not there yet, or do you think we're already there and more tweaking?
I think thanks, Kevin. I think we're actually looking at the fractal landscape, fractal mental landscape.
Describe that, because some of our listeners are going to go, fractal what? And so
because there's always, Richard Feynman used to say there's plenty of space down there, down at the bottom. And this is certainly true of forests. There's a lot of things that get eventually so microscopic that no amount of remote sensing is going to dig that up. So it kind of depends whether the main purpose of these surveys of forest inventory is for simply quantifying your amount of timber for sawmill purposes, or whether you really want to, for example, create a payment system or some kind of compensation for preserving biodiversity or carbon. Carbon is like obviously a massively simplified quantity to do, but it has relevance to climate, and it has a semi-working market, I would say. I mean, I haven't really seen working carbon markets yet, but there's both the project-based approach, normally using VCS standard and supported by Vera, or then there is the jurisdictional level where we are more active, which is typically like building the capacity in a country to quantify the forest in the first place and monitor deforestation and forest degradation. But I think I could briefly here, for those of your listeners who are having access to video, to share my screen and show one example of what I think that forest inventories will look like in the near future, to some extent already now. So I'll share it, and now I'm share. Are you seeing a map, Kevin?
I am, yes, looks good. So for our viewers, you'll be able to see this. For our listeners, Tuomo's just showing a web map with some data, and we'll do our best to describe it. But if you really want to see it, hop onto the YouTube side to visualize it. But yeah, Tuomo, take it away.
Yeah, okay. So I'll zoom out a little bit so you see we are somewhere up in the north, actually on the Swedish side. And then I'm going to zoom in, and this is a relatively large property of less than 100,000 hectares that we have done a detailed inventory in. And it's a boreal forest up in the north, but which is mostly used for timber production. But because it's up in the north, where the age of trees typically gets up to over 100 years before they are harvested, so you have to be careful with the value. And what you see now first is simply the stand volume color coded. On the right hand side there's like how much timber there is, but what we really normally want to see is much more detail. And I'm going to go into canopy height. I mean, this is the canopy height model, so many of you are quite familiar with this. And here you can see the more red it is, the taller the tree. And there's a clear cut here with some seedling trees left standing and so on. But now the other kind of things that we might want to see of the forest, I'll pick this off, and we'll take the species map. And this is often much more interesting. Now here we have a particular color coding that orange and red are deciduous in mostly birch up there in the north. The purple is pine, and the green is spruce. And when we zoom further down, you see that actually we have this data now at individual canopy level. The borders of the polygons not visible here, but they are basically segmented into individual trees. And then the kind of things apart from, you can do tree diameter like this. Okay, it takes now a while to, or maybe I try tree volume. Let's see if it's any faster. Sometimes, yeah, there's a little red blinking there, which says that it's loading. Yeah, this is the challenge. You already see one practical challenge of individual tree information, that even if it's vector data, it's massive. There are literally, how much trees? We would have roughly 80 million trees on this area. So getting those polygons down will seemingly take maybe even too long. I'll see if I can. It's not really worth waiting. So I may rather move to the other layers and see
Sure.
which can.
And this thing you're showing, Tuomo, this is something like you would provide your clients as a way to interact with the data products or information products you create for them.
Yes, exactly. And you can see, I will read here some of the variables that we calculate from this and show those that can be. So it starts from stand volume, site index, canopy height, tree diameter, tree volume, and the species map. There's also nature value classification, which is basically FSC standard. Okay. So you have to have like these different levels of conservation, and we estimate these from the parameters that we calculate. And this is done at the grid level, as you see from the shape. Then we have canopy structure map, and that is actually quite interesting. It tells how homogeneous versus layered your canopy structure. Now, if it's strongly layered, it typically means it's the forest that has been clear cut in the past, has been harvested, and now second layer is growing. But if you have a lot of mixture, that is liable of being old forest, or at least, more natural than this. So this is one of the things that emerges out of lighter and lighter alone. So remembering the thing that you need the tree height distribution to get. Then we identify dead trees and dead tree groups for biodiversity. And those standing dead trees we can identify automatically out of the area. And then there's simply a clustering algorithm that tells that when you have a group of dead trees, that might contain valuable biodiversity. It also might be a bark beetle destructed site, but luckily up in the north, they don't have these problems yet. They will come, and I know in BC, you know very well what the bark beetle can do. So we are facing it now because of climate change and climate getting warmer. Southern Finland is already having some incidents, and Central Europe is really devastated by that. So I'll take those off. There's tree carbon, yes. So we also calculate the amount of carbon, but there's maybe for the benefit, there's really no working carbon market in Scandinavia or Europe. In fact, governments take the carbon for their EU mandated reporting on carbon sinks and carbon emissions and so on. So they go under the Kyoto Protocol, and there's like an emerging private market, but the border between the public market, private market is not clear, and that kind of prevents massive growth of the.
Oh, interesting. I wasn't aware of that. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But there are trials now, and there's certainly Canada and US have been ahead of Europe as a whole. But we'll see. I mean, it would definitely be good if we had like a good measurement quantities for both carbon and biodiversity that are predictable enough and objective enough to justify investment, because that would then bring a different type of capital resources to forestry and also forest management, forest conservation. They would allow us to enhance the value of forest by much more qualitative things than just as raw material. It's still the pain in a forest dependent, forest industry dominated country like Finland that roughly 2/3 of our forests are just basically a forest field. They may grow 100 years, but it's still just to be cut. And there's this national controversy or international controversy, and not unknown in Canada either, that what you should do. And I'd like to reward forest owners for also seeing the other side of their trees. Then we do things like forwarder mobility. I wonder how fast or slow is this to load. So just for harvesting, here you see. So here's an interesting color code. I hope it emerges a bit more widely here. So if something is very blue, it means it's too wet and you may sink your harvester or forwarder. If something is very red or yellow, it means that there's an inclination. And that you have a lot more in BC than we do here. But we don't have to do in practice cable yarding in Nordic countries, mostly, except Norway. And so this dictates where you can drive your harvester and whether you can drive it just uphill or even along the slope. And this is where red means that only uphill is possible, or red means that you can't drive at all. It's too steep. Orange means that you can drive uphill, but you can't drive sideways. And if it has no color, then it means that you can drive any way you like, except for the blue part where you sink your harvester into a bog. So that that sort of thing. And then we also have this map of seasonal harvestability, which tells in what season you're able to go and do your harvesting. So there's actually a lot of places where you can't go except in midwinter when we still have permafrost and the ground carries the machinery. But there we go.
Right.
And
So
finally,
lots of data layers there, so you're leveraging the data to its fullest potential.
Yes, exactly. So that's what I wanted to show. Like this, where I think we are. That here you can see 10-year harvest plans by stands. So we automatically produce the stands, and then semi-automatically, let's say, according to customer demand, specify their yield and their planned operations and so on.
Right.
I'll stop sharing here
Okay, no,
And
that's
so
great.
we'll
That's
come back.
great for great to see the products live and live in action.
Yeah,
Whenever you do a live demo, you got to sweat a little bit, right? Otherwise,
right.
it wouldn't be a live demo. So thanks for sharing that. And so with the software side, I know on the Arbonaut website there's Arbo Firm, there's Arbo Fizz, and there's Pro MS. Maybe for our
Hmm.
listeners and viewers, tell us more about that, because what you showed us just now, would that fall under
Hmm.
the Arbo Fizz?
Yes, yes, you
Okay.
were right. Or actually, we were looking at it from, but what happens is that we have like internal production engines, and the most important is Arbo lidar. You know, that's like already a 20-year-old tool of kind of family of tools, a library where all the statistics and calculation and sample plots and whatever, you know, the kind of things that customers don't do, but we need to do internally, and we need to have it automated. So it's the environment where point clouds turn into forest knowledge, and then this data is fed to various other systems for decision making support. And ArboFIS is basically a forest management system, but we don't really go into forest planning. I mean, this is where we so have set the limit that trying to do. So we don't sell systems to forest owners in order for them to plan. Actually, most of our customers for that are big governmental forest agencies, so forest owners like the Finnish National Board of Forest, which hosts 9 million hectares of Finnish forest. So we tailor these systems for their needs and their business processes. But our own products like ArboFIS is a platform that allows this tailoring to take place. It handles basic things like forest stands and reporting and parameter generalization and stand delineation manually and this sort of stuff quite well. But it's just like the bare bones version of that. And then Arbo Firm is specialized for forest fire management. So that's a totally different community. They need the same information, but in a totally different format. So they need to know the amount of fuel, the flammability, um, possible locations of fire breaks, water sources, you know, all this stuff. In fact, one of my first active employees in this site is a really nice lady from Vancouver Island, Janice Burns, who had been serving like 6 years as a firefighter, airborne firefighter in Canada. So she used to do this abseiling in the middle of a fire, you know, something that you would never dream of doing in Finland, but over there you have these brave hearts who are able to do that. So Janice now lives in Vienna and works at UFRO, the Organization of Forest Research, but she was an Arbonaut trainee, and I would say like not really yet a lifelong lens, since we've known about 10 years, but so all of this created this sense for what kind of software tools might help in firefighting. And still, we are not providing anything for the guys in the field or guys and gals in the field. It's in this planning management center or fire managers tool that, okay, this is where I have my crew. This is where the fire seems to be raging right now. Our plan with that Arbo Firm is to use, if possible, nationwide or provincial LiDAR to produce a preparation map, you know, a map which allows you to decide what to do no matter where the fire starts, because you have the basic information. Things like vertical canopy gaps, you know, that whether you have enough space between your brush and your lowest branches of your canopy so that the fire is unlikely to jump to a canopy fire. In Canada, of course, a lot of provinces, you have this situation far north where you can't do anything anyway. I mean, there's no access, no resource, but also not necessarily a lot at risk. If there's a pipeline or a First Nations community, then obviously you have to mind it. But that's satellite-based work. So we mostly focus on small scale, detailed fire suppression planning, and also prescribed fire management. That, okay, this is where you want to now reduce the amount of fuel by prescribed burning, but it's still a dangerous game, as I think all Canadians would know since Fort McMurray, and it's never going to be complete. It's also crucial from the climate point of view. So we try to provide a tool that will help mitigate the damage of forest fires, but it can't stop them.
Yeah, for sure. So recently, there's an announcement from X Prize about a competition where around forest fire or wildfire and space-based wildfire detection and intelligence. The
Okay.
requirement, so just a few $1 million to be won. Who would be interested in that? But there's two requirements. One is to detect within 1 minute uh, wildfires at the state, country level, all within 1 minute. And then two, then you have 10 minutes to then generate a precise report where you flag, what false positives and whatnot. And not to, if you're going to go after it, not to get you to share your secret sauce, but what are your thoughts when you hear that 1 minute to detect that, let's like continental level, and then you got 10 minutes after that to then refine the report? Crazy, or is this in the art of the possible?
It's in a way overkill, and it kind of dangerously maybe moves the resources and planning and thoughts into somewhat inappropriate direction. There are places, yes, where even 1 minute would be. So of course, for this X Prices, it's important that you set up a really ambitious goal. At some point, I've been following closely, even collaborate with Aurora Tech. It's one of those companies which definitely would submit. They had, for example, this key idea that they can communicate the location of a fire using SATCOM rather than waiting for the download at northern latitudes. So there are companies who are able of doing it, but the way I see it, that in most cases, this 80% of the benefits of fire mitigation is achieved before the fire starts. It's in prevention and not in suppression. All that is meant, of course, to make suppression efficient and fast so that you know where you are. But our view is more like that if you have all the necessary basic knowledge everywhere, then no matter where the fire starts, you know what to do. You know what your resources are, where to deploy them, and so on. And so that this will probably help mitigate fire risk more effectively than only fast detection. So it's one side of the equation. It's one where we deliberately don't play, because there are indeed others, and there are already somehow reasonable services, EFIS and others, which are based on the VIRS and OSIRIS instruments. So they bring you, within a few hours normally. There are cases when this is too late. Certainly when you're in California or Mediterranean climate, this tends to be the case. But even there, like preventing fires to the extent that it's possible. Now here the problems actually are somehow more vicious, because it kind of requires that there's an economical motivation or economic need to reduce, for example, the brush. There should be a market like biofuel or whatever that you do. This is pretty much the case in Finland. So we harvest most of our forest, and because of that, there's a very dense forest road network. That means that the ground-based fire engines can reach. We also have the country still reasonably densely populated. They said that we regard Lapland as sparsely populated. That is about 1/3 of Finnish area. But they say that if you go above the 60th latitude in Canada, the entire area from Yukon to Labrador has as many people as Lapland. And it's almost 100 times bigger. So talk about sparse population. So it's kind of relative, but so that means that it's kind of the fog of war. I really like that term. That is the hardest. That you don't know where the fire is, what is happening, and what to do. And even if you find the fire, it takes a lot of time to somehow. You need to send a field crew there to survey the area first with drones, typically, and so on. So for our purpose, we said, okay, why not to do this offline beforehand using LiDAR, have all those maps digitally, and if needed, even paper, or there are a lot of reasons why digital systems in a fire sensitive situation are not the best. So it may stay in the management center, commands go to the field crews, or you may want to print quickly and have a kind of fireproof paper map of the situation for those guys who really need to go there. So they're like multiple directions, but they all come with their own set of problems. And I think for the X Prize, this is a perfectly good and suits their portfolio. But
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, all right. There's Nadia, our cleaner. We have a retired persons club here that is 3 people strong. I'm one of those. I'm technically retired. And, Nadia is our Russian cleaner who was volunteered to work here after she retired because she enjoyed the
Yeah.
atmosphere in the office so well.
Yeah.
So she's
Yeah.
doing the upstairs late in the evening.
Well,
But
you'll never retire, my friend. We know that you're too curious there. So maybe as I shift the conversation, I'm keen. Last time we saw each other, I think was the Eureka event
Helsinki, I
in
believe.
Helsinki
Yeah,
in 2018
yeah,
or something. And there's a
yeah.
lot of companies with new technologies, doing different things. But you and I have been at it long enough, and you much longer than me. But when we look forward in forest technology,
Hmm.
what gets you excited? Like, are there certain themes because you've developed software, you've dealt with LiDAR, you've dealt with
Hmm.
area-based inventories, individual tree inventories, you've dealt with spaceborne
Hmm.
mapping, especially in support of carbon programs, and
Hmm.
again, what is it, 30 plus countries. But as we
Hmm.
look forward, like on the website, the Arbonaut website, it talks about digital twins. What are some of those technologies that in your quote unquote retired state, which I do not believe, by the way. What are those things that gets your mind excited and eager
Well,
for?
somehow I I'm not fundamentally a geek, maybe. It's so I don't mind technology, and I like maybe algorithms are like my own home turf in a way. I like devising algorithms and see how things are organized. But the way I see is that I mean, somehow we are approaching this situation which we have in weather forecasting, climate forecasting. You integrate information and knowledge and understanding, both from mathematical models, from measurement data, but with forests, even more so than with weather, there's always people, animals, plants, life, meaning integrated into these forests. And for me, the biggest driver is in a way that we finally seem to be able to regard forests as somehow, equal value as human beings, that we are not specifically only promoting human welfare. We have this, and especially when you work in Africa and Asia, Southeast Asia, we've had a lot of projects. You have these communities of people who've been dependent on forests in different ways for long times. In fact, this family of my wife was pretty much like this. Finland wasn't that far. They had, for example, no machinery, not even a tractor. Everything was done manually. They had five cows for milking, and the only money they got from manual harvesting. My late father-in-law was the wisest person I have ever known. He had only 4 years of education and 3 years in the Eastern Front in the war, and that kind of matured him into such a balanced and a person with foresight, really. And he was earning his living by cutting his own trees and selling them and complementing with that with basically subsistence agriculture. But something in that community resembles me with what I see now in Africa and what I see over there. So I'd like to see ways that people who really are close to forests, they would have a better and maybe a bit richer life, being able to earn, not having to forsake your identity and so on, but be able to afford a life that is not all sweat and toil.
Yeah,
And this combination, that these digital twins, they can help planners to take these things into account. So it's this integration of all this understanding in digital twins, and then having to put that to good use, which is balanced in economic, ecological, and social terms.
yeah.
That's what drives me.
Yeah.
That's why I never made much money on Arbonaut because that wasn't the first purpose anyway. It was to have science have a positive impact on this world, and I hope we're still heading in that same direction.
Yeah, well, I can say, the work you've done has had an impact, like for sure on the commercial side, right? And there's always time to keep doing that research elsewhere. So thinking of the international community, I'm curious to know, because I can sense that passion there as I ask you, like, this is where I'm going, this is where my interests are, my energies, bettering the lives of people and their lands. Is there a memorable project overseas that maybe tugged your heart or made you cry out of frustration, or what's a fun story you can share with this guy?
Okay, there's any number of projects, but one of my favorites where I wasn't really personally involved, but Arbonaut was the project we did in Bhutan. Bhutan has some of the most beautiful forests on earth, and they have this constitution which constitutionalizes happiness. You have to. Our first proposal didn't meet the gross national happiness index,
No
and
way.
only the second one did. And then we had this team occasionally visiting Timbu and working. It's a medieval state which is Buddhist, has a very how to say very enlightened king right now, which has regulated tourism. For example, you have a limited number of tourists and go. It's rather expensive to go there, but you go there for genuity. This sort of facing the community and the people. And so we also found very competent partners in IT technology of all places in Bhutan that
Wow.
were able to integrate our system to the local government. The challenge came when COVID hit us, and they went to lockdown, Chinese style. In fact, to the point you couldn't leave your house in Timbu. And so our project was postponed by half a year, if not a year, by the fact that our Bhutanese team inside Timbu couldn't go to the Ministry of Forests to install systems because of COVID restrictions. But COVID passed, and that was done. And the system we built there is a simple decision support system which checks that whenever any construction in forest is being planned, it checks if it violates any of the existing conservation laws and policies. So whether it's a road or a power line, check, and then you adjust as needed. So of course, every society needs the infrastructure, but they are the most careful custodians of their forest of any other place on earth I know. So I greatly admire them, and this is maybe a good project to remember. I would have a lot of projects where a lot of adventure has happened. That's the other side, okay, there are accidents. Yeah, all right. Let me tell one more. This is it's in Nepal, neighboring place, but this is good. We had a measurement project there where we had to take field plots, and we had local crews who went out and measured. In Nepal, like in Bhutan, it's pretty tough. You
Yeah.
need to climb a lot, and then you find this. And I found it somehow comical that our random selection algorithm points to a place somewhere where you have to go and measure. So there are statistical validity, and this thing may be like 2 kilometers up next to a gorge and whatever. But on one occasion, the team came finally after a long climb into their site, and then they phoned back. There was still a mobile phone field, and said, "What do we do? There's a python on our plot." And my
And
team
it's not a little
manager,
python, I'm sure. It's one of
yeah,
those
yeah, yeah.
ginormous, yeah.
Okay, so and pythons are not that, they're not disturbed and they don't want to move. So what do I do? And I had this Danish special forces guy who was doing my management, still a very good friend of mine. And what would you think a special forces guy suggests? What do you do to a python on the plot site?
On one
They
side, I feel
otherwise
like
wasted the whole day if
I
they.
feel like on one side, this Danish special forces guy would just jump on the python and arm wrestle it out of the plot. But uh, uh well, I I don't know, drop a little fruit.
Well, you know, he was remote actually. He was the manager in Kathmandu or somewhere,
Oh,
and
okay.
the field crew was, you know, he had several field crews and he couldn't join them all. So
I couldn't, yeah, no, I got nothing for you. I'm still processing that there was a python on the plot.
yeah, okay. So his instruction was sing to it,
What?
sing to it, sing to the python. And apparently the melody was well chosen because the python decided not to take this disturbance and slithered away. And they were able to complete this this measurement plot.
So is that actual fact? If you sing to
Well, I was told it by the crews participating and so on, and I have no reason to assume that Thomas would lie. He does have a lively imagination, but I've seen him perform tricks that are much more incredible than this with my own eyes. So I, as far as I know, this is true.
I feel like you and I have a trip coming up, my friend, Nepal, to go find a random plot with a python on it, and I'm going to sit there. I'm going to use my iPhone and scan it with lidar for context, and then I'm going to video you as you sing to it to see what happens. And if it goes south, I'm going to
Yeah.
run faster than you. You're on your own with the singing side, but what an incredible story! I would never have thought of singing to a python would
Yeah.
do the trick, but amazing, amazing.
Yeah. And maybe it kind of rhymes, you know, with my view of the forest and so on. So these
For
sort of
sure.
things happen, and this is what makes it so magical, you
For
know,
sure.
that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
So as we look to wind down, a lot here, a lot of different views. You shared some of your technology, your rich history of where how you started. I love that story.
Mm.
Less the tragic part with
Mm. Mm.
your brother-in-law there, and where you are today. So obviously with Arbonaut, you're still in business, doing stuff, innovating on different fronts. So if there's something in this podcast that someone heard or they saw in the video and they wanted to learn more, what's the best way for folks to get a hold of you? Is it by email, LinkedIn, or website? How would folks get a hold of you, Tuomo?
I would imagine LinkedIn is a good way to start. I mean, I will certainly answer anybody who contacts me there. Almost anybody, let's say. And we have a very good media person in Daria Smirnova who does our LinkedIn posting. So it gives the most authentic picture of life at Arbonaut and our project. So it's a good way. So by all means, be in touch, and I'll really appreciate you, Kevin, for having invited me here and having this contact to Canada. We've long tried to get something serious going in Canada. We've started something almost in every province, but so far no real projects. So I'm really looking forward if there's a way to get. And we always want to work with local partners. You know, that's Arbonaut only has offices, 2 offices, both in Finland. So all our activity in other countries is based on local people and local organizations partnering with us. So.
Sure.
Please feel free to touch, and
Absolutely. And
thanks a
that
lot.
goes to everyone listening as well. Big on partnerships and opportunities. So feel free to reach out to the Arbonaut team. So Tuomo, I know it's 9 o'clock in Finland right now. And is it still sunny out, or has the sun finally gone down?
No, unfortunately, the sun has sunk, but you know, we're approaching midsummer and we are at 63rd latitude.
I know. I
So
know. I know.
very soon we enter the period when dark, so all the nights will be light, you know, and it's so beautiful.
Well, when we met in Helsinki way back then, I took a detour and visited some friends in Stockholm in Sweden, and
Right.
it was not that warm. There was sunlight, but everyone was outside drinking a beer, and I was thinking, I'm Canadian and I like cool weather, but this was another level. Like I was like, I can't believe there's so many of you enjoying that, but it was daylight out. It was incredible. It was
Yeah.
it's hard to sleep, but I know you guys have techniques to deal with that. But yeah, no, I appreciate you carving some time out for me late in your evening to chat
Pleased
and
to do
share your
so.
story, and definitely appreciate that. I look forward to seeing you in person one of these days, hopefully soon.
Yeah, indeed. Looking forward to that, Kevin. And
Awesome.
thanks very much. And thanks also to everybody or anybody who's been listening to this. So
Sure.
I hope to
Awesome.
have some contact with all of
Okay.
you.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks for your time, and we'll keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Yeah,
Okay. Bye-bye.
bye for now.